tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect. Do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. Tell you the
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 15th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets High School DxD. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Elsewhere. Meanwhile, far away in the east and unaware of what was going on, Harry was sitting in his library, waiting. What was he waiting, you might wonder? It wasn't a what, but a who. 2 days ago, he received a missive from the vampires factions of Romania and had been pleased when he read that they menaced their counterparts of England of death if they joined Voldemort. The raven-haired young man was also pleased to hear they weren't even thinking about joining what they considered a lesser species. Like him, they looked at wizards with disdain. His mother, Esh, the primordial deity of life, had also told him of what was going on in the wizarding world. Usually, Harry wouldn't want anything to do with such a backward world, but he wanted to know their reactions at the letter he sent to the great Dark Lord Voldemort. As predicted, the letter was published in the Daily Prophet, a local newspaper, and it caused an uproar among the magical English citizens. From what his mother said, many wizards and witches were in despair, wanting him to come back and save them from the Dark Lord and his followers. Some, of course, were furious of his refusal to do his duty and even called him a coward for fleeing in face of what is right. Needless to say, this caused Harry to be a bit angry, as he hated being called with this word before remembering that it wasn't his problem anymore. However, a part of him, his dragon side to be exact, was inquiring him to at least do something. After all, wasn't he the dragon god of balance, peace and justice? Yes, he was, but Harry had long ago said that he will never raise a finger for the world who abused him and or ignored him during his time of need. What did the wizarding world did for him anyway? Nothing. Worse, the purebloods, people he hated with passion, saw themselves as the most powerful species on this planet when a single centaur could kill some of them with ease. For Harry, a society who allowed bigotry, prejudices and racism to spread wasn't worthy to exist. The same for the people in it. Was he cold-hearted? Yes. But only for those good-for-nothing wizards and witches who themselves as top dogs when they are nothing but mere bugs against creatures such as dragons or devils. Heck, even fallen angels were stronger than those cursed people. And it wasn't every day that he complimented those bird brains. And no, Rainier doesn't count. At first he had never planned to write a letter, but it was Akeno who had the idea. He didn't understand why he should do before she explained to him, what better revenge than leaving them to their fates. Of course, it would mean that people from the light, mainly Dumbledore and possibly the Potters, would try to find him even harder to convince him to fight by their sides against Voldemort and the Death Eaters. Speaking of Death Eaters, the one he captured some time ago had become a test subject for one of the 4 great Satans, Lord Beelzebub, who apparently was having a lot of fun with his willing volunteer. Sarah Fall, who sometimes came to visit at least 5 times a week, often commented that everyone could hear the joyous scream from the Death Eater whenever someone passed by Beelzebub's laboratory. Being sadistic BSTRDS was a common trait among devilkind apparently. Another thing that had changed in the past few days was his friendship with the creature known as the strongest being of existence, Great Red himself. Ever since the Apocalypse Dragon declared him his equal and accepted his friendship, the two of them grew fond of each other almost like siblings. However, that doesn't mean that they didn't want to fight one another again in the future. In fact, for the time in millenniums, Great Red had found someone to call a friend and a worthy opponent. The two of them would chat with each other for hours when Harry fell asleep at night. Having dream manipulation, the large red dragon had the ability to visit his rival/friend in his dreams. Even Great Red had been amused by how stupid the wizarding world was and was also disgusted by their behaviors. In fact, Harry discovered a side of the Apocalypse Dragon that he never known before. While everyone knew him as an annoying BRT or a delinquent, Great Red had shown Harry that he was also honorable, wise, fun dragon humor and really knowledgeable. It was like talking to an old man. Harry, during those moments with the Red Dragon, would use it to learn many things as Great Red had seen a lot of things in his life, even the biggest battles humanity had ever known, world wars. While he already knew them thanks to a certain primordial deity of death, it was still nice to hear it from another perspective. Anyway, back to topic, Harry was currently waiting for a representative from the Carmilla faction, the all-female vampire faction for those who didn't know. In the missive he received 2 days ago, the leader of the Carmilla faction, to show him how much they supported him and not only for the BLD lollipops, had decided to them him one of their own. He had been completely taken aback by the sudden upcoming but decided to go along with it as he was sure whoever she was he was 100% sure it would be a girl at this point, she won't simply go back if he asked her to. Of course, to be sure that his soon-to-arrive guest would be comfortable, he built another room and bought everything he needed so his guest would feel as home or as much as possible. And thanks to Kuroka, Asia, Tiamat and Rainier, the shopping was fast even if they passed 4 hours in the shops. He did shopping courses before, but man, when you have 4 women with 3 women and a young teen with you, things could quickly go out of hands. When it was over, Harry had shed a few tears as he had lost a large amount of money. Some of it was worth it as he bought some presents for his rather big family. The reaction he got from the present warmed his heart greatly. Asia had given him one big hug when he gave her an appealing golden pendant with a heat-shaped emerald on it. The colors matched both her hairs and her eyes. Kaneko hadn't stopped purring at the sweets she received, while Ravel Phoenix, his apprentice, received the same pendant that Asia, but instead of a heart-shaped emerald it was a phoenix-shaped one. Akeno received a new WHP for her to use, which caused many to shiver at the sight of it, along with the sadistic cackle she let out after that, while Tiamat and Ophis both received a golden strap filled with pieces of crystal. To Yasaka, he sent her a book about wizarding spells just like Rias and Sona. It was fun to see the stars shining in their eyes when they received the books. Kunu got new set of toys for her to enjoy, while Gasper received video games, particularly RPG or simulation games. Sarah Fall even received from her caring boyfriend a new staff for her to use whenever she wanted. The staff itself was gold in color, but the tip of it looked like a snake-like creature, which was ironically a leviathan. His cousins, Lo Fei and Arthur Pendragon, both received a book on magic and an appealing dagger respectively. It was needless to say that Lo Fei had thanked him greatly for the gift, as she had been really interested in wizarding spells, especially transfiguration. Issei and Saji both received a book whose title was How to Get Rid of Our Perversion. Of course, the sight of it caused the two to stare at Harry with deadpan expressions on their faces, while the others had all laughed with amusement. Otherwise, all of them were satisfied by what Harry offered them, even if it wasn't their birthdays. Of course, the best reaction he received came from a certain black-haired Nekashu with golden hazel eyes. What was it, you may ask? Kuroka had gave him the biggest kiss he ever received for this. Why? Because, in her room, he added some cat toys for her to enjoy when she was in her other form, a robotic mouse, a playful feathers wand, ball of yarn, etc. He even bought her a 2 meters tall cat tree. Kaneko would sometimes tag along with her older sister in her white cat form, and needless to say it was a really cute sight to see the two felines running around playing with the toys. Even some of his girlfriends, along with Asia, Rias and some others, awed at the sight. Back to present, Harry was reading a book about World War II when he felt something bothering the wards. Someone had entered the domain. And seeing that the wards hadn't lowered their guards, it must be his guest, as only intruders or strangers could cause such a reaction. Taking a deep breath, the young lord slowly rose from his seat before walking toward the front door to welcome his guest. However, before opening them, he called out half loudly half softly, "Fanny!" Instantly, in a soft pop, appeared one of his loyal house elves, who did a small bow at her lord before asking curiously, "Mstr Harry called for Fanny?" "Yes, prepare something for our vampire guest after such a long trip. She must be hungry, and tell Mickey to prepare her room, she might want to rest," the young lord explained to his servant, who quickly bowed at him. "Of course Mstr Harry. Fanny will do as ordered." The female house elf excitedly replied before disappeared with a snap of her fingers. Rolling his eyes in amusement at the elves' antics, the raven-haired young man turned his attention to the front door as he opened them wide to take a look at the Carmilla faction's representative. Outside, he was surprised to see a 150 centimeters tall doll-like girl with long wavy light blonde hair, deep red eyes and an appealing face which was strangely similar to that of a Western doll. Her skin was also deathly pale, a strong proof of her affiliation with vampires, and she was wearing a red dress similar to those princesses of the Middle Age used along with an ornamented headdress. Harry had to admit that the girl standing there was kinda cute and looked similar to an 11-years-old kid. But appearances can be deceiving, as he could feel a strong aura inside her. Lord Peveril Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emery's Lefay, the newcomer asked him softly as she eyed him with contained excitement. The tone of her voice and her accent looked similar to Italian, which was logical as Romanian is a Romance language belonging to an Italic branch. In fact, her accent reminded him a bit of Asia's when she once spoke to him in Italian. Shaking his head to regain his thoughts as to look impolite in front of his guest, the raven-haired young lord looked back at doll-like vampire with a soft smile on his face. Yes. Am I right to assume that you are the representative of the Carmilla faction? Harry asked her back with a raised brow. Instantly, just as those words reached her pointed ears, the newcomer bowed at him with nothing but respect as she responded back. Yes, I am. How do you do? I'm deeply honored to meet the new dragon god. I am Elmenhild Karnstein. Please call me Elman. Harry couldn't help but chuckling at how he was addressed before looking back at the vampire before him. The honor is mine, Lady Elmenhild. Please come in and make yourself at home. The raven-haired young lord inquired to his guest as he stepped aside to let her come inside while opening the door wider. With a soft smile and with a strange bit of pink on her cheeks, the doll-like vampire entered the mansion while looking around with some interest as she followed the young man in front of her. She had to admit that the rumors about him were true, especially about how handsome he was. His hair's as black as a moonless night and those eyes as green as the purest of emerald were part of his charms. Along with that, his power was intoxicating and as powerful as the rumors said, or maybe even more. Thanks to the leader of the Yukai faction, Lady Yasaka the Kitsune, she and the rest of the Carmilla faction had seen his battles against Cerorg and Regulus. Later, when the words of a new dragon god reached them, they were shocked, especially when the new dragon in question was none other than the young man who creates such delicious sweets for their kind. After Lord Peveril sent them a missive stating that he would stop sending us his stock of BLD lollipops, the leader of both vampire faction, for the first time since that separation, had both agreed to stop going at each other's throat. To be sure that their weaker kind, the vampires of England, would not cause trouble, they menaced them of death if they dared to do one single move. Lord Peveril's sweets were famous among vampire kind as they could not only taste BLD but experiment other flavors without endangering themselves. Her favorite ones were the cheery-flavored BLD lollipops. It was to mostly meet the young man that she volunteered to go to Japan as the Carmilla faction representative, that and the fact she was a vampire noble. Anyway, back to present, Elmenhild was staring at the young lord's interior and had to admit it was gorgeous. While the mansion itself was kinda ancient, it was well kept and still gorgeous to look upon. Then, as they passed near the library, Elmenhild took a quick look inside and was really interested in what type of books the young man possessed. Harry glanced at her when he noticed that she stopped following him and chuckling when he saw the interest in her red eyes. If you want, you are free to take a look inside later, but first, I think you need to rest for a bit, the raven young man inquired to the doll-like vampire, who blinked at the sudden voice and looked at the speaker with some confusion. After all, you must be exhausted from your trip, Harry added as if he hadn't noticed the confusion on her cute face. Elmenhild couldn't retain herself as some pinks appeared on her cheeks. Why wouldn't she? The young man barely met her and yet he was concerned for her well-being. It was heartwarming even for a vampire like her. With a soft nod, Elmenhild followed after him when Harry started moving again. The doll-like vampire girl, as they both walked further into the mansion, couldn't stop looking around as the inside was getting more and more appealing. Another thing that shocked her was how big it was from the inside. Sure, the mansion already looked large from the outside, but the inside looked even bigger. A chuckle caused her to break out of her thoughts to look instead at the young man before her. A simple spell to enlarge the rooms, that's why everything here looked bigger in the inside than the outside, Harry explained to the vampire, who couldn't help but listening with nothing but interest and shock. Note to self, ask him to teach her some spells. Nodding at the lord of the place, Elmenhild quickly went back after the young man as the latter resumed the tour. Soon, Harry stopped right in front of a wooden door before looking back at his guest with a smile. Here is your room from now on. If you are looking for me, I will be in the laboratory over there, Harry explained to her before pointing at another door down the corridor. Thank you for your kindness, Lord Peveril. Elmenhild bowed respectfully and gratefully to the handsome green-eyed young man before her. You're welcome, Lady Elmenhild. Please call me Harry. I'm not one for title, Harry replied back with a smile that warmed the vampire's heart even more. Nodding at the Carmilla faction representative, the young man then turned around before heading toward his laboratory, leaving behind his guest, who couldn't stop staring at his back until his form disappeared inside the room. Sighing deeply, Elmenhild opened the wooden door to take a look at her new room and gasped softly at what she saw. The inside of it was appealing in her opinion, as everything looked Victorian eras like, especially the bed, which was king-sized and covered with black and red. The window was covered with BLD-colored curtains which strangely matched her eyes. Then her eyes landed on something that caused her to suddenly being filled with glee. There, in a jar, were lollipops, but not any lollipops, BLD lollipops. At the sight of them, Elmenhild couldn't retain herself any longer and quickly approached the jar to pick one of the delicious sweets. To her joy, 4 of them were cherry-flavored BLD lollipops. Her favorite one. There were also banana-flavored, peaches-flavored, chocolate-flavored, etc. Without thinking, the doll-like vampire quickly picked one of the cherry ones before pulling out the paper to savor the sweet. A delighted and content hum escaped her mouth as she used her tongue to taste the lollipops. Then she slowly climbed on the large bed, and to her amazement and delight, it was really comfortable. Elmenhild putted her head on the puddle, sighing in satisfaction while enjoying the sweet freely offered to her by her host. Even if it had been a few moments, the vampire had to admit that her host was being really good so far. A bit of pink appeared again on her cheeks as her eyes slowly closed themselves as tiredness overcame her. Maybe some rest couldn't hurt. Meanwhile, Harry was in his laboratory, preparing a new batch of BLD lollipops when a portal appeared near him. It wasn't a devilish portal but a runic one. From it, appeared someone Harry recognized instantly. It was a dwarf. Graham. Welcome, my friend. Harry greeted the newcomer as he sat on his knees to be at the newcomer's size. He, long time no see, youngster. The dwarf replied back with a friendly laugh as he patted the young man on the shoulder. Graham was a 4 feet 6 inches tall old blacksmith who had a prosthetic right leg and a blind eye. He also had a big brown beard reached down his belly and a look of kindness in his old eyes. Being over 250 years old and all. His face was filled with scars, and the biggest was the one on his left eye. In addition, the newcomer was wearing a full set of iron-made armor while having a strange package with him. Harry and Graham met over 6 years ago during a trip in Canada thanks to Muerte and her torture sessions, and it had been the first time for the raven-haired boy to see a dwarf. Graham was apparently a high captain who decided to take a vacation for a few weeks. From what Harry heard, the poor guy had lost his wife to a disease and his son left their home to found his own family. Harry managed to befriend him when he helped the latter in fighting against a pack of werewolves. Thanks to his armor, the dwarf had avoided the bites, but they were too much for him to handle, so he gratefully accepted the young man's help. Following this, as a sign of gratitude, Graham pledged loyalty to him and even taught him the way of the dwarves, especially in the uses of axes and runes. In return, Harry gave him a way to come visit him whenever he wanted at Peveril Mansion. However, being a captain was a tiring job, so Graham would only visit him 3 or 4 times a year, not that he minded, as he could understand. The last time he stopped by was almost 2 months before Muerte forced him to attend Kuo Academy. Congratulations, by the way. The brown-bearded dwarf inquired to the young man, who blinked twice as his thought were broken at the sound of the voice. "What for?" Harry asked him with a frown of confusion, as he had no idea what he was talking about. "About your ascension as third dragon god, of course. What else would it be, lad?" Bergram replied back with a raised brow of amusement. The raven-haired young man stared at his friend with shock, while the latter was still laughing at the face he was making at the moment. "How do you dash?" Harry began to ask him in stupor, only to be interrupted by his dwarf friend. "Harry, everyone in the supernatural world know about this. And thanks to my friendship with you, my king promoted me to general." Bergram explained with a small smile on his breaded face. Blinking a few times, Harry then released a soft chuckle as he replied with a hint of fond exasperation. "So much for a peaceful life, huh?" Bergram laughed loudly in response before clapping the young raven-haired boy on the back. "Blame your luck for that, old friend," the dwarf began to say before a flash of remembrance passed through his blue eyes. "Oh, right here, a little something for you." As he said those words, Bergram picked up the package he was carrying before handing it to Harry, who took it with a frown of confusion. "What is it?" the young lord asked the dwarf with curiosity. "Take a look yourself, youngster." Rolling his eyes at the dwarf's antic, Harry slowly opened the large box and was shocked to find its content. It was a sword. Not any sword, a longsword, and European weapon. The sword was magnificent to look at and could be described as a masterpiece. The hilt was made of pure gold, and the pommel looked like the head of a roaring lion with emerald eyes. The crossguard of the weapon looked sharp and could easily be used to wound an opponent in battle, while the blade shined under the light. The hilt was 30 centimeters long, while the blade itself was really imposing, around 1 meter long. Harry couldn't retain himself for staring at it, as something in his core felt attracted to it. Slowly, he picked it up and was shocked by how light it was despite its size, and Bergram backed away as his friend swung his new weapon for a bit with amazement clear on his face. "It is an amazing sword, my friend," Harry commented once he stopped his movements. "My best creation. Took me months to forge it." Bergram inquired with no small amount of pride in his tone. "How come?" Harry asked him with raised brow. While he knew it'd take time for a weapon to be made, Harry was still wondering why did it take that long to make this masterpiece. "Well, mainly because I have to find the stuffs necessary to forge it. The metal itself take to use," Bergram replied with a shrug. "From what I heard, steel and gold don't take that long to be used," Harry inquired with a frown as he glanced back and forth between his friend and the sword. "Oh, it's because it is not a normal steel. It is the strongest you can get," Bergram replied with a grin on his face and again with pride and arrogance in his tone. Harry frowned as he tried to remember all the metals that existed in both mundane and supernatural world. Then he glanced at the sharp polished blade deep in thought. The color was silver, but then Bergram wouldn't use such a metal for a weapon unless. Widening his eyes in realization, the raven-haired young man turned his head to look at the dwarf, who had his arms crossed over his chest. "Are you telling me that the blade is made of dash?" "Yes. Made of mithril. Lighter than steel and strongest metal in the world." The brown-bearded dwarf laughed back at the godsmacked face his friend was making at the moment. Harry mumbled in stupor as he looked back at the blade. "And this is my gift for you," Bergram added with a smile which caused his friend to look at him with wide eyes. I don't know what to say." "What about, thank you, Bergram, for being the best blacksmith?" the dwarf inquired with a playful grin. Harry snorted with amusement before giving his friend a soft smile. "Thank you, my friend. It was a pleasure doing it. Now I have to go, I have a meeting with my king in a few minutes," Bergram remarked to the raven-haired boy, who waved his hand dismissively. "It's fine, old friend, I understand. Send my regards to your king," Harry inquired the dwarf as the latter was about to step into the runic portal, which was still active at this point. "I will. Goodbye, Harry, see you," Bergram said one last time before disappearing through the portal. Smiling at the spot where his friend disappeared, Harry then looked back at the sword in his hands. This weapon was even more appealing than the sword of Gryffindor and was made for him by a good friend. He will cherish it to the end. But then as he admired the noble weapon, an idea came through his mind. What if he could upgrade it a little more? A grin slowly made its way on his face as he stared at his reflection on the blade, his eyes slightly glowing with power just like the pommel's emeralds. Turning heels, the young man slowly approached the main table of the laboratory, the one holding the pensive he used to help Kuroka to become a free Nikushu. Gently, he lowered the weapon the wooden table before picking up a small knife he usually used during his BLD sweets preparations and slashing his right hand with it. Grunting a bit at the slight pain he felt, Harry however ignored it to lower his bleeding hand right above the blade, covering it with his warm and fresh BLD. Suddenly, the weapon started to glow as more and more BLD touched the blade and Harry couldn't stop himself from hissing in displeasure as the light was becoming more and more bright. The light emanating from the laboratory could be seen in the hall but thankfully, it dissipated just as quickly so it didn't bother Elmenhild who was still sleeping. Back to the laboratory, Harry blinked a few times as to make sure he hadn't been blinded by the bright light before slowly turning his gaze toward the weapon his dwarven friend made for him. Only to gasp in shock at the sight. The weapon itself hadn't changed entirely. However, now, a strong power radiated from the blade which was now harboring a strange drawn-like symbol on both sides of T. It looked like his dragon lion form in runic drawing. The crossguard itself, while still being golden-colored, changed and took the form of a lion's head with emerald eyes and remarkable finishes which strangely looked like his wings in dragon lion form but golden instead of blue and green. The pommel was still the same but on the roaring lion head's forehead, we could see the faint shape on the Libra symbol. The hilt was now covered with a green coating while interlaced with silvery metal which might be mithril. Wow, Harry muttered softly as he admired the weapon's new appearance with stars in his eyes. The sword was appealing to look at earlier but now it was truly a weapon worthy of a god or a dragon god in that matter. As the young lord looked at his reflection, he wondered how he should name his new weapon. He wanted a name fitting for such a gorgeous weapon. A name showing how he would use it. One thing was sure, he would not use this noble blade to commit massacres well except those who disrupt the balance but for doing what is right. Harry wanted the sword to become a symbol in the supernatural world but what symbol? Not war as he was the dragon of DMN. I'm such an idiot. He wanted to punch himself hard for being such an idiot. He was the dragon god of balance, peace and justice so why not using the sword as a symbol of his title? There now he knew how to use his weapon and why, to bring down those who would harm those he loved and the people who cannot defend themselves. But there was still the problem of naming the weapon though. As his green eyes gazed at the crossguard, the lion head along with the hilt and pommel all glowed slightly and as if they had spoken to him, an idea of name passed through his mind as a soft smile grew on his face. You shine like the stars and your light warm me like a fire would, he whispered to himself before adding with a proud expression on his face. From that day on, you will be known as the Sword of Light, Kalmasil. May you warm the heart of the innocents and protect them from harm. As if the weapon accepted its new name, a light surrounded it for a brief moment before disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Smiling at his new weapon one more time, the young raven-haired lord then went back to what he planned to do before this whole situation. Working on the net batch of BLD lollipops. Time skip. Harry was right now back in the library, laying on the sofa with exhaustion clear on his face. 2 hours of hard work to make 4 barrels of BLD sweets but it was worth it. He just sent Mickey out of the domains with the barrels to send them to the vampire factions. The young lord also used this moment to secretly send a message to the leader of the Carmilla faction to tell them of their representative's presence in his mansion. Using his left hand to get rid of the sweat on his forehead, Harry then heard something from the other side of the library's entrance and called out in a gentle tone. I know you are there. Enter. I won't bite. The last part was said in a teasing manner and a few seconds later, the wooden door opened to reveal Elmenhild who now harbored pink cheeks as she seemed embarrassed at getting caught. Slept well Lady Elmen? Harry asked her politely with a smile. I did Lord Peveril. The doll-like vampire quickly responded with a bow of respect at the young lord. "Please call me Harry, I'm not one for titles," the raven-haired young man replied to his interlocutor with a wave of his hand. "If that what you want, Harry, but only if you call me Elman," the vampire replied back with a small blush. "All right then Elm dash," Harry began to say back in response when he heard a really familiar voice echoing from nearby. "Harry Kun. It's us." Chuckling softly, Harry watched with a smile when the familiar face of Akeno Himejima peeked in the room with her loving eye-closed smile. "Hello there sunshine," the young raven-haired man inquired seductively to the newcomer, who giggled a bit at this before stepping closer to pull him into a hug. Era missed me that much Harry-kun?" Akeno giggled back with an amused raised brow, completely ignoring the other girl present for the moment. "Of course. I especially missed those appealing violet eyes of yours," Harry replied back with a grin as he looked at Rias Queen dead in the eyes. "You're flatterer." Akeno cooed back with a giggle before kissing his lips again, to which the raven-haired young man returned in kind. The sight only caused a certain doll-like vampire to blush madly as she tried to hide her face with her hands. However, that didn't stop her from hearing as the sound of many footsteps caught her attention along with a pouting voice. "Hey! Don't hog him all to yourself." Smirking, Akeno broke the kiss to stare at the newcomers with an eye-closed smile. Who were they? The answer: Tiamat, Kuroka, Rainier, Rias, Kaneko/Chiron, Asia, Issei, Kiba, Rosweiss, Gasper, Zenobia, Irina and of course, Ophis. Back to topic, the one who spoke was none other than Kuroka, whose hands were on her peach while glaring daggers at Akeno, who didn't look ashamed in the slightest and in fact looked more amused than anything. Even Rainier was glaring at Akeno as she wanted to be the one to kiss him when they arrived. Tiamat and Ophis, for their parts, seemed indifferent by the whole affair as they made their ways toward the man they loved. The infinite dragon, however, shot a brief glance toward the vampire, who shivered slightly at the power she felt from her. Gently pushing a pouting Akeno aside, Ophis then kissed Harry right on the lips, not caring that she was being watched. The raven-haired young man blinked a few times before melting into the touch as he returned the kiss, much to Ophis's pleasure. "Can't you get a room, you two?" Issei's voice echoed from the doorway, which caused the kissing duo to regain their composure. Ophis shot him a blank stare, but we could see the annoyance in her dark eyes as she narrowed them at him. Harry too looked at the perv with annoyance before smirking playfully. Without warning, he used his left arm to pull Tiamat to him before kissing her right on the lips. Taken aback by the sudden action, the Chaos Karma Dragon then slowly returned it with a small of delight. Issei stared at them blankly for a few seconds before whining pitifully, "Why don't any girls kiss me like that?" Then he added more sternly, "All pretty boys should die." Instantly, a punch in the guts caused him to fall on the ground with a groan of pain, courtesy of Kaneko, who muttered loud enough to be heard, "Hate pervs." Just as those words left her mouth, a bag of sweets suddenly floated in front of her face, which caused her face to brighten. "A little something for my favorite kitty," Harry replied with a grin as he looked at the white-haired Nekashu. Kaneko sent him a small glare at being called a kitty, picked up the bag of sweets before sitting on the nearest sofa to munch some of them. Ironically, it was the sofa Elmenhild was on, so Kaneko shot her a brief glance before looking back at Harry. "Replacing Mionizan?" she asked him with a sour look on her face. Ever since Harry became Kuroka's lover, Kaneko no longer saw him as a cousin but as an older sibling. And who was he to complain, as he loved the white-haired Nekashu dearly? Harry stared at Kaneko with a deadpan expression on his face before commenting, "I think Akeno is a bad influence on you, Kaneko-chan." "Moo, you're so mean, Harry-kun," Akeno inquired with a pout as she looked at her lover. And it deepened when she noticed that everyone seemed to agree with his words, even her king. "Anyway, Harry, can you present us your new friend?" Rias inquired to the young lord as she wanted to know who was the one sitting on the sofa. However, just by looking at her, the redhead could tell that she was a vampire: long canines, pale skin, BLD red eyes, yep, the physical signs that someone is a vampire. "This lovely lady over there," Harry began to say with a grin toward Elmenhild, who blushed at the words before opening to say something else. Only to be interrupted by someone you never thought would speak so freely. "Is a member of the Carmilla faction." Everyone turned their heads to look at Gasper, who blushed a bit in embarrassment at the attention he was receiving. Elmenhild looked at the girl-like young man with a raised brow but then became serious. "Aren't you Gasper, the son of Lord Vladi?" The androgynous boy gulped slightly at the question but nodded his head in answer. Harry looked at the damper with a raised brow while commenting with a bit of amusement. "I didn't know you were a child of noble kiddo." Gasper blushed madly at those words and turned his head away from Harry in embarrassment. Chuckling, the raven-haired young man turned his emerald-green eyes away from Gasper to look at Elmenhild with a smile despite looking dead serious. "Maybe you should present yourself, milady." It was Elmen's turn to blush but then cleared her throat as she went back on her feet before looking at everyone present. The blush on her face had disappeared as quickly as it came. "How do you do, people of all powers? I'm especially honored to meet the little sister of one of the Mouse, the Great Infinite Dragon and the Chaos Karma Dragon. I am Elmenhild Karnstein. Please call me Elmen." Rias bowed at the newcomer while of the people did the same except Tiamat and Ophis, who merely nodded their heads in greetings. "Welcome and co Elmenhild Karnstein, may I ask the reason of your presence here?" The Gremory heiress asked the doll-like vampire with some curiosity while trying her best to hide it under an air of neutrality. "Our leader sent me to represent the Carmilla faction. She wanted to show her support for Lord Peveril," Elmenhild responded casually while glancing at Harry, who looked back at her with a raised brow. "I see, but I don't understand. Why would you support him?" Rias asked the vampire with narrowed eyes. Feeling a bit playful at the moment, a certain raven-haired young man with emerald-green eyes couldn't stop himself from stating to the redhead. "Isn't that a hint of jealousy I'm hearing there, Riri?" Instantly, Rias' aqua-blue eyes turned away from Elmenhild to glare at Harry, who harbored a large grin on his face as the redhead hissed at him in embarrassment and exasperation. "How many times did I told to stop calling me Riri?" Still grinning, Harry used his right hand to reach for the redhead's face before her above the head. "Aw, don't be like that, Riri. You wouldn't want your pretty little face to be as red as your hair now, would you?" Rias's face, at those words, reddened even more as steam could be seen pouring out of her ears. Her aqua-blue eyes were narrowed at Harry, and if looks could kill, he would be dead with such a fierce glare. Around them, people were snickering in amusement while Tiamat and Ophis had allowed amused smiles to appear on their faces. Elmenhild was completely stunned by the way the two acted. After all, it was a bit strange to see such powerful beings acting so unprofessional. "I will get you back for this, mark my word," Rias grumbled under her beard. "I doubt you will, but here a little something for you as a sorry gift," Harry inquired playfully before kissing her on the cheek, the left one if you want to know. The action caused the redhead to froze on the spot, and even some people looked stunned by the sudden action except Rainier, Kuroka, Tiamat, Akeno and Ophis. Speaking of Rias' queen, she couldn't stop herself from commenting with a hint of amusement in her voice. Era planning to add another girl in your pride, Harry-kun fufufu?" Maybe not," Harry replied back with a grin of his own while Rias was now nothing more than a blushing mess. "Can't you stop taking all the girls?" Issei hissed, no pun intended, at the raven-haired young man with jealousy and envy clear in his tone. However, the brown-haired perv quickly backed off when Kaneko cracked her knuckles in a menacing manner along with a dark glint in her eyes. "Relax, pal. I don't plan to take your girlfriend from you anytime soon." Harry replied to Issei in a friendly manner at first before smirking toothily at the last part. Hearing this, both Rias and Issei blushed madly while turned their eyes away from one another in embarrassment. Everyone couldn't retain themselves anymore and laughed loudly with humor, and even Elmenhild couldn't stop herself with giggling softly. However, the amusing moment was broken when a certain infinite dragon commented with narrowed eyes filled with suspicion. "Harry-kun, why am I sensing a powerful sacred gear in you?" At those words, everyone stopped laughing to stare at the raven-haired young man, who chuckled sheepishly in response as he rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. Everyone were now staring at him with narrowed eyes as they waited for his answer. Kiba, the young lord noticed, looked tense, and he knew that the blonde was now suspicious as his new sword held almost the same aura that the Excalibur pieces. Even if Kalmasil was much more powerful than the legendary sword of King Arthur. Well, Harry began to say before he felt someone entering his domain. He knew those signatures pretty well by now. I will explain in a bit. For now, I must welcome our new guests, the young lord inquired to his friends and girlfriends before leaving the library toward the front doors. Curious, the others followed him, especially Elmenhild, as she wanted to know who might possibly come to see Lord Peveril. Imagine her surprise and shock when, after Harry opened the doors, she saw two women on the other side. Like many creatures in the supernatural world, she knew who it was and couldn't help herself as she quickly bowed in front of the two newcomers, who were none other than Esh, primordial deity of life, and Muerte, primordial deity of death. She was not the only one, as some of the others did the same except for Ophis and Harry, of course, but they quickly stood back when Esh waved a hand dismissively while inquiring in a gentle tone. There is no need to bow, little ones. Elmenhild couldn't help but comparing the deity's voice with honey because of how sweet it sounded. In addition, the caring look in her eyes warmed her greatly with calm despite being in the presence of deities. Even if it is nice to receive some respect from time to time, the primordial deity of death commented with a hint of amusement in her blue eyes. Unlike her sisters, Elmenhild remarked, the pink-haired woman's voice sounded like flowing water, calm but yet cold. The only thing that wasn't causing the doll-like vampire to shiver were the deity's eyes. Despite being the deity of death, her blue eyes held nothing but love and care. Esh shot her sister an amused glance before looking back at the people in front of her until her eyes spotted Harry. Smiling warmly, the primordial deity of life stepped closer to the young raven-haired man before pulling him into a gentle hug, which he returned wholeheartedly. Elmenhild was stunned by the actions currently taking place as she glanced back and forth between Lord Peveril and the deity. Wondering at first what was going on, the doll-like vampire then remembered that her host was Lady Esh's son, so it wasn't surprising to see the two showing affection with one another. Esh and Harry hugged each other for a full minute before slowly breaking it. The primordial deity of life had a radiant smile on her face as she looked at her beloved son, but then frowned in confusion and a bit of suspicions. Harry dear, why am I sensing a powerful artifact on you? She asked him with a curious raised brow as she crossed her arms in an authoritative manner. Serious mode activate. I think I want to know that too, Muerte inquired with a stern expression on her face as she looked at her nephew with narrowed eyes. Glancing around, Harry noticed how everyone was now looking at him expectantly except Kiba, who looked ready to lunge at him as he had summoned his sword. Taking a deep breath, the raven-haired young lord then looked back at everyone present before inquiring in a soft tone. Follow me to the dining room, I will explain everything there. Nodding at him as the mansion's doorstep wasn't the most comfortable place to have such an important discussion, they all followed him as he led them toward the large room that was generally used during mealtimes. Once everyone were sitting on the chairs, Harry glanced at them one by one as he took a deep breath. He could see the impatience in some of his guests' eyes, and he couldn't blame them for being this curious and couldn't help but secretly smirking at the faces they will make once he will show them his weapon. They were in for a big surprise. Alright then, first of all, Aunt Moo, meet Lady Elmenhild, the Carmilla faction's representative, Harry began to say as he gestured toward the doll-like vampire who bowed at the two deities. Don't bow, little one, this is not necessary, Esh inquired to the vampire with a warm smile on her face. Muerte didn't say anything as she stared at Elmenhild, but then smirked toothily as she then turned her attention toward Harry before inquiring in an innocent tone, far too innocent for his taste. A new girl for your HRM, dear nephew? Thankfully Harry wasn't drinking anything, or else he would have choked on it. Elmenhild, for her part, was blushing madly as she tried her best to look anywhere but at Harry, who was looking at his aunt with a pale expression on his face while everyone else looked amused by the scene. No. She is here to represent her faction, that's all. You sure? Because if you want to add her in your HRM, you have my blessing, Muerte replied with a grin and a wink. The blush on Elmenhild's face deepened at those words while Harry hid his face in his hands in embarrassment. Feeling a bit of pity for her son, Esh decided to save him from more embarrassment as she slapped the back of her sister's head before scowling her like a 2-year-old child. "Stop embarrassing my son Mu, or else no more Sailor Moon for you." The primordial deity of death looked at her sister with horror while everyone present laughed at the comical scene in front of them. Even Harry was chuckling as, thanks to his mom, he was now serious again. "Alright, I will stop. Geez, you are not fun," Muerte grumbled to her sister as she pouted in indignation. Grinning victoriously at the pouting deity, Esh then glanced back at her son before saying, "After all, no one embarrass my son but me." Harry's relieved face turned into a pale one as she looked at his mother with slight fear, which caused her to laugh loudly with humor. "You should have seen your face." Grumbling something inaudible under his beard, Harry then tried to break the embarrassing moment to return to their topic. 2 hours ago, someone came to visit me just after Elman here." As those words escaped his lips, everyone became silent as all eyes were on him. All of them looked curious, even if Ophis was still keeping her straight and emotionless face and waited for him to explain further. "Who was it, Onizen?" Asia asked him with the cutest expression of curiosity you could see. "Bergram," Harry replied softly as he looked at the former nun with a smile. "Bergram? Who is that?" Issei asked out loud in confusion as he looked at everyone present, who looked just as confused. Except for 2 people in particular. What did the dwarf want? Muerte asked her nephew with some coldness in her tone. The primordial deity had apparently a strong dislike against dwarves, as she saw them as nothing more than greedy and arrogant little bstrds. She hadn't been happy when Harry befriended one, but reluctantly accepted it as her nephew didn't had a lot of friends back then. But that doesn't mean she still liked it though. "Wait, dwarves are real?" Issei asked Harry with disbelief and shock from his seat beside Rias, who glanced at him with a smile of amusement. "What is a dwarf?" Asia asked the deity with a titled head, as she had never heard of them before. Muerte opened her mouth to answer, but Esh was faster. "Dwarves are like humans but smaller in stature. However, they are the best blacksmiths and stoneworkers of the world. They are also strong fighters despite their short size." The primordial deity of death grumbled something under her breath, and this caused many to look at her with frowns of confusion. Seeing this, Harry opened his mouth to answer their unasked question. "She hates dwarves." A grunt of agreement from Muerte caused more than one to drop the subject, even if some were curious as to why she hated dwarves. But with her being a deity, it would be difficult to convince her to tell them. "So my dear, you were saying?" Esh looked back at her son with a raised brow in an attempt to return back to their previous discussion. The raven-haired young lord blinked gratefully as his mother, while Muerte slowly looked back at her nephew, a bit calmer than a few seconds ago, even if we could see the coldness in her blue eyes. "Oh, right, as I said, Bergram came to visit me 2 hours ago, congratulate me for my ascension as dragon god and telling me of his promotion as general," Harry explained as calmly as he could. "Can you go straight to the point?" Issei inquired him rather rudely, as he wasn't really known for being patient. "For once I have to agree with him," Muerte inquired from her seat with a nod which caused more than one to stare at her with shock, as it was well known how much she disliked Issei the perv. In fact, the only reason Issei was still well here was because he was one of Harry's friends. Harry rolled his eyes at the two of them, as he knew why his beloved aunt wanted to skip the part with the dwarf, but he decided to do it regardless, or else he would have to suffer another lecture about how dwarves were nothing more than liars, thieves, and greedy little monsters. "Fee and Bergram came to give me something," Harry grumbled with fake annoyance to the two before getting up. "What did he give you, Onizen?" Kaneko/Chiron asked him with a raised brow of curiosity as she eyed him from her seat. "Don't you know the proverb, curiosity killed the cat?" Harry asked the white-haired Nekasho with a playful grin on his face. Kaneko glared daggers at him, and he obtained the same reaction from her sister Kuroka, who didn't look amused in the slightest, while everyone else were trying their best to hide their amusement. With a smirk, the young raven-haired young man closed his eyes as he took a deep breath before reopening his eyes. At the same time, in his right hand, appeared Kalmasil in all its glory. At the sight of the sword, many gasped in shock at the power radiating from it. "Everyone, let me present you my new sword, Kalmasil." Harry inquired proudly as he spined the weapon in his hand. In response, the blade shined under the light and the emerald glowered a bit. Ash and Muerte glanced at each other with a small smile at the reaction the weapon caused to the other people present. Even the primordial deity of death had to admit that Bergram did an excellent job on this sword. She might dislike dwarves, but even her, had to admit that their work was simply impossible to rival. Magnificent, Rosweiss commented as she eyed the sword with pure interest. Many others mumbled their agreements. Even Ophis couldn't deny that her mate's sword was appealing to look out and radiated a power similar to the most powerful sacred gears. Kiba, however, was glaring at the sword hatefully, and Harry seemed to notice as the raven-haired young man fully turned his head away from his weapon to stare at Rias Knight. "Something the matter, Kiba?" he asked the blonde with a frown. "Give me the sword. This is a piece of Excalibur." Kiba roared in anger as he jumped on his feet, literally climbing on the table while his eyes were still locked on the weapon. Suddenly, Harry's eyes glowed with powers as a darkish aura surrounded his body. At the sight of it, Rias and her peerage minus Kiba and Akeno all flinched as they remembered what happened the last time he did this. They ended up on their knees. However, after a few seconds, nothing happened and they all looked relieved for a moment until their eyes landed on Kiba. The blonde was on his knees and it was easy to see he was being pressured by something invisible. So Harry learned to direct his aura. Good thing. For him. This sword was forged by dwarves. I then used MYBLD to link it with me. Kalmasil is bonded to my soul. Harry's voice replied calmly but also icily. However, unlike the previous tone, there wasn't any deep voice, just his normal one but much colder. The tone alone caused many except Ash, Muerte, Tiamat and Ophis to flinch in fright. Kiba, for his part, was absolutely terrorized as he stared at Harry with nothing but fear on his face. "Harry, stop it," Ash inquired to her son in a calm tone, but the seriousness in her eyes sent shivers down everyone who seen it, even her sister. Harry's eyes flicked to his mom and shivered at the look he received, so he quickly dropped his aura before looking apologetic as he rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. "Sorry," he mumbled under his breath to the blonde who was slowly getting back on his feet. "S-okay," Kiba managed to mumble back to the raven-haired young lord as he sat back on his chair, looking down in shame. Rias glanced at her knight with a worried expression before looking back at Harry when the latter spoke to his mother and aunt. "Mom. Aunt Moo. I was thinking of," Harry began to say before nervously pausing. For his weapon to be recognized as a symbol of power, he had to add a little something on it, the blessing of a deity. A weapon blessed by a divinity had more chance to be seen as a powerful artifact. Sure, Kalmasil will be seen as a strong weapon, but with a deity's blessing? It would be seen as a legendary weapon. "Yes, son?" Ash gently inquired him as she was a bit curious about what he had in mind. Muerte was just as curious as her sister as she was looking at her nephew with an expectant look on her face. The coldness she had when they talked about Bergram the dwarf was gone and was now replaced with care and attention. "Can you bless my sword? Please?" Harry bluntly inquired the two as he glanced back and forth between his mother and his aunt. The two primordial deities blinked in surprise as they hadn't expected such a request from the young lord before them. They weren't the only ones, as everyone else were staring at Harry with wide eyes of stupor, except Ophis, who merely raised an eyebrow at her mate's request. "I don't see why we couldn't," Ash inquired pensively after a few moments of silence. Muerte nodded at her sister's words but then looked back at Harry with inquisitive eyes. "Before we do, I want to know why you would ask us such a thing, dear nephew, the primordial deity of death." Harry, knowing that the question would have been asked at some point, took a deep breath before opening his mouth to answer with sincerity. "I want Kalmasil to be seen as a legendary sword. I want its name to be said with respect in the future as one of the most powerful weapon forged." Ash glanced at the sword in her son's hand before looking back at him. "Dear, even without our blessings, Kalmasil is much more powerful than Excalibur and can compete with the most powerful sacred gears." This small piece of information caused many to gap at the sword with shock and disbelief. The youngest one's Asia, Gasper and Kaneko were also looking at Harry's weapon with stars in their eyes. Even Elmenhild couldn't retain herself from staring as she couldn't believe that a dwarvish sword could rival a sacred gear. "I know, but I decided to make this weapon as a symbol of my mine," Harry replied softly as he looked at his mother in the eyes. Then he looked at his aunt who hadn't said anything as she stared at him with a calculative look in her blue eyes. "I know I'm asking you a lot, but I also wanted to have a part of you. I want to use it in your names," Harry inquired in a sincere tone as he looked at the primordial deity of death in the eyes. "Do you really think flattery will get you anywhere?" Muerte asked him with a stern expression on her face as she narrowed her eyes at him. "How well Harry grumbled nervously as he stared at his aunt who suddenly started laughing. "Well then you succeeded," the primordial deity of death inquired to her nephew between two laughs. Harry stared at his aunt with a deadpan expression which caused many to snicker in amusement. However, his attention was quickly caught when a certain deity of life started to speak. "Indeed you did, son, very well. We will grant you your request," Esh inquired to her son as with a wave of her left hand, Kalmaso levitated toward her. Without a word, she went back on her feet just as her body surrounded itself with a white aura-like mist. Her eyes were now green orbs without slits. Beside her, Muerte was in the same situation except that her aura was gray-black in color instead of white and her eyes were aqua-blue instead of green. "Me, Esh, primordial deity of life, bless the sword of my son, Kalmasil with durability. May the blade never be broken." Harry's mother spoke with a deep feminine tone. The same tone she used back when she, along with her sisters, turned him into Arslan, the celestial dragon god of balance, peace and justice. As those words left Esh's lips, a white light surrounded the sword and one of the drawings became white in color instead of dark gray. "Me, Muerte, primordial deity of death, bless the sword of my nephew, Kalmasil, with eternal sharpness. May the blade remain trenchant and never dulls." Harry's aunt recited in an equal tone as she brushed her left hand near the blade. Just like her sister before her, the blade was surrounded by a gray-black light and the other drawing was now completely as black as a moonless night in color in contrast to the other one who was as white as snow. Once it was over, everyone could feel an even greater power radiating from the sword. Harry stared at Kalmasil with pride once Ash returned it to him with a small smile along with a small, "It is done." Grinning, the raven-haired young man span his sword in his right hand before staring at his reflection through the blade. Smiling, Harry then looked back at his aunt and mother before bowing his head slightly. "Thank you. Anything for you, son/dear nephew," the primordial deities responded at the same time with warm smiles on their faces. Era, you will never stop amazing me, love fufufu," Akeno inquired seductively from her seat at the right side of Rias. "What can I say? I'm just amazing," Harry retorted with fake arrogance. Esh fondly rolled her eyes while Muerte snorted in amusement at her nephew's reply. Some of the other present seemed just as amused and a few were rolling their eyes with fond annoyance at Harry's antics. Kuroka then made her way toward her lover before hugging him from behind with her large melons pressed against the back of his head. "A problem, kitten?" Harry asked her with a playful raised brow and was rewarded with a kiss on the forehead from Say, "Kitten." "No, I just wanted to cuddle you, Naya," Kuroka replied with a purr-like sound as she pressed her right cheek against the top of his head with a content sigh. Rolling his eyes at the black-haired Nekashu, Harry then noticed two more people at his side and before he could say something, they both hugged him tightly. Who was it? Kaneko and Asia, of course. "I want hugs too," the former nun inquired softly as she hugged her brother figure's right side while the white-haired Nekashu hugged his left one. Kaneko didn't want her older sister to hog Harry all to herself. While she didn't have any romantic feelings for the raven-haired young man, she still loved him deeply as a brother figure. Harry found himself being unable to move and looked at the others for help only to see them looking back at him with grins on their faces as no one made a move to help him. "I hate you all," he grumbled at them and his words caused them to laugh with amusement at his predicament. Esh, as she looked at her son, was trying her best to hide her worry. Destiny, the primordial deity of fate and her younger sister, told her that Harry will got some visitors later in the day and one of them will surely anger him just by the sight. When asked, Esh was outraged to hear that Lily Evans Potter would come here but had promised her sister to not say anything to Harry, but deep down she was still angry at the woman for what she did so many years ago. Shaking her head to get rid of those thoughts, the primordial deity of life looked back at her son who was trying his best to escape the hug but failed. She will have to worry about that later. For now, she will just enjoy the moment with her sister and her son and her future stepdaughters before the storm came by. Time skip. The day passed rather quickly as the deities left a few minutes ago to perform their duties, but Harry didn't believe them as he was 100% sure both his mom and aunt were currently watching their favorite anime Sailor Moon from Muerte and Saint Seiya for Ash. Kiba also left because he had a date with Tsubaki and he didn't want it to be late as he planned to take Sona's queen to a nice restaurant. The others minus Tiamat, Ophis, Kuroka and Rainier were all doing the homeworks Rossweiss gave them during class the day before. It was the main reason of Rias Peerage's presence here. Akeno and the redhead, however, were there to learn more stuff from Harry's books, especially when he bought some more to add in his library. Books on animagus or elemental magics particularly. Rias was now really good at transfiguration while her queen was a MSTR in attack spells like Expelliarmus or Confringo. Even young Asia showed prowess in magic as she could perform a lot of defensive and healing spells. Just before the deities left, someone else entered the fray in the form of the youngest member of House Phoenix, Ravel. Thanks to Harry and his tutelage, the girl could perform a good variety of spells and even managed to learn one thing or two in how to use her fire power. Ravel could use it to defend herself, to protect others or simply to attack. Harry had however noticed the looks and glances she sometimes gave him whenever she thought he wasn't looking, and it wasn't hard to understand that Ravel had a crush on him. Of course, because of this, she became what Rias called a Yandra, and it was proven when Ravel saw Elmenhild near him right after her arrival at Peveril Mansion. He had to stop her from doing something drastic as it was evident that the blonde looked ready to attack the vampire. In the end, after a lot of explanation, Ravel and Elmenhild made a tentative friendship after talking with one another. The former was really curious of vampire kind while Elman was curious of how she became Lord Peveril's student. Anyway, back to present, Harry just finished the essay Rossweiss gave him and he handed it to her. The Valkyrie thanked him gently before reading it, her eyes slowly turning into stars as she went through the lines. "Well done, Lord Peveril." Rossweiss inquired the young man, who nodded his head in response. Just before him, the Valkyrie took a look at Asia's essay, and while it was shorter than his, she had been pleased with what she read. "Your turn, Issei-kun," Rossweiss inquired to the brown-haired perv who reluctantly handed her his essay. Going through the lines, Harry felt uneasy at the sight of the Valkyrie's face turning a bit sour. While Issei was a perv and all, the brown-haired young man was not a bad student. That's why he had been accepted at a prestigious school such as Kuo Academy. So to see Rossweiss being like this was intriguing to say the least. "Well, you may redo this, Issei-kun, for good measure," the Valkyrie told the brown-haired boy in a serious but kind tone as she handed him back his essay. "Come on. It's as no that bad." Issei replied to Rossweiss as he picked back the paper. "Not the worst thing I saw, but close," was the Valkyrie's answer before she left them to go elsewhere. "I hate homeworks," the brunette boy grumbled under his breath as he glared at his essay. "Easy, pal, there is something more terrible than homeworks, I can tell you," Harry replied in encouragement from his seat just as everyone stopped what they were doing to look at him with interest. "Like what?" "If you are referring to what we had fought against before, Issei began to say before being interrupted by the raven-haired young man. "No, those are child play compared to what I have in mind. What could be worse than fighting fallen angels, Riser and his peerage, a giant golden lion, Fenrir, or Great Red?" Gasper asked him from his place beside Elmenhild with clear curiosity on his face. "Easy, the worst thing you can have to handle is the nightmare of all politicians, lords or leaders," Harry said with a grim expression on his face. "Which is?" Rias asked him with a raised brow as she might have an idea of what he was talking about. "Paperworks." Some of those present grumbled their agreements at that while the others shrugged their shoulders or simply stared at him with confusion. Sirs X always complained about having too many paperworks, and the same could be said from Seraphol or Zeoticus Gremory. Ravel Phoenix stared at her mentor for a few seconds before nodding her head in acceptance while keeping in mind how dangerous paperworks were just in case. Elmenhild also seemed to understand what Lord Peveril refereed, as her leader also dealt with this and never liked it. "I'm sure paperworks is not that bad?" Issei inquired stupidly as he looked at the raven-haired young man with a blank look on his face. He was instantly rewarded by multiple deadpans from Harry, Rias, Rainier, Kuroka, Akeno, Ravel, Elmenhild and Rosweiss, which caused him to shut up for a while. The raven-haired young man opened his mouth to answer. He suddenly stiffened. The reaction quickly caught the attention of everyone present as they stared at him with concern. "Onizen, are you okay?" Asia asked her older brother figure with pure concern. "I'm fine." Someone had entered the domain, Harry replied with a stern expression on his face. Ophis hummed in thoughts as she used her sense to detect the newcomeress. "I sense 4 people, 2 men and 2 women." Tiamat nodded in agreement to the infinite dragon's words as her own face looked stern. Harry closed his eyes as he used the wards to get more information on the unexpected visitors. "I know 3 of them, the last one I don't recognize," he inquired after a few seconds of silence as he went back on his feet. "Who do you think it is?" Kuroka asked her lover with a raised brow as she and the others quickly left their chairs. "The 3 are none other than Sirius Black, my godfather, Remus Lupin and Tonks. The last one is familiar, but I can't remember where I felt it," Harry responded with a frown as he tried to remember where he had felt the magic signature of the unknown visitor. "Regardless, I should let them in at least," Harry replied with a shrug and a sigh as he went toward the front entrance of the mansion. Of course, he was followed by some of the others except a few, mainly Rosweiss, Rias, Akeno, Issei because he had an essay to finish, Ravel, Gasper, Elmenhild, and Kaneko. Rainier decided to stay behind as well, as she wanted to keep an eye on Asia and prevent Issei from doing something idiotic. The 2 of them grew really close with one another as the time passed. Those who were currently following him were Tiamat, Kuroka, Ravel being the Yandere she was, and Ophis. Ignoring the girls behind him, Harry slowly opened the mansion's front doors and was greeted by a welcoming sight. Like he had predicted, it was of course Sirius, Remus and Tonks. The former 2 were strangely close as they stood shoulder against shoulder as if they were trying to hide something or someone. "Watch her, Harry." Tonks greeted him with a friendly wave as she stood right in front of the werewolf. "Hey Tonks." Harry greeted back as he pulled the older girl into a tight hug, happy to see her again before looking back at the 2 men. "Sirius. Remus. Welcome back." The raven-haired young man greeted the 2 with a joyful expression on his face. "Hey Cub. Long time no see. How are you?" Lord Black inquired him with a smile. However, the smile itself was suspicious. While it was genuine, it also held a bit of nervousness in it. Harry's eyes narrowed a bit at that as glanced back and forth between the 2 men, especially when he remembered that he felt 4 magical signatures. "Where is the 4th one?" He asked them with a raised brow as he crossed his arms over his chest, taping a foot on the ground as he was waiting for an answer. Instantly, he noticed how nervous the 3 newcomers looked, and the 2 men were glancing at each as sweats poured down their foreheads. Tonks looked at everything but not him, as herself was nervous. "Forgive us, Cub, but she insisted to come," Sirius inquired in soft tone as he stepped aside with a nervous look on his face. Remus did the same as his friends and harbored the same expression on his scarred face. And there, standing between the 2 men, was someone Harry thought to never see again. His eyes glowed with anger as he glared at the person in front of him as his pupils turned into slits. An emerald-green aura-like fire started to surround his body as he didn't turn his head away from the 4th newcomer. He could never forget her, especially as the emerald-green eyes and the red hair were a big giveaway. She was the one who accepted to give him away to the Dursleys. She was one of the people who abandoned him to 9 years of torture in Hell of Earth. It was the bee who accepted to listen to a senile old man's words instead of her heart. It was Lily Evans Potter, his former mother. Location, Japan. How will we find Harry Albus? James Potter asked the leader of the light as he and the rest of their group were trying their best to not be seen by the locals. Notice me not charm is the best. As they walked out of the airport. A few moments ago, they secretly arrived on Japan's grounds by using Muggle travel, much to Arthur Weasley's joy, as he was always curious of the Muggle words and its technology. They had no choice, as they knew the Japanese government was now in high alert concerning English wizards and were now checking every magical people who entered their grounds. That's why they decided to use the metal bird, the Muggles' non-magical folks, in case you didn't know, affectionately named a plane. While it wasn't as fast as magical travel, it was far from unpleasant. Alongside James Potter, or Lord Potter, were some members of the Order of the Phoenix such as Minerva McGonagall, Molly Weasley the Banshee. Run for your lives. The old coot Albus, Percival Bruin, Woolric Dumbledore, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Ginny Weasley, Jacob Potter the former boy who lived, and 4 others. They were all here with one mission: finding the missing boy who lived and take him back to England to make him fight Voldemort. While they all knew it will surely cause a direct conflict with Japan government, they had due to it. In their minds, especially the headmasters, the prophecy was a true one and must be fulfilled no matter the cost. And as a certain old coot would constantly said, it is for the greater good of Great Britain and the entire wizarding world. Of course, some of the people present had secret motivations regarding Harry, but you already know them, so I won't repeat myself. Back to present, Dumbledore glanced at Lord Potter for a few seconds before slightly pointing his wand forward. Point me, Harry. Normally, at this point, the wand should point at the direction of the named person, but to the old wizard's shock and disappointment, it wasn't, and in fact, stayed still. Albus, what is going on? Molly asked the leader of the light with a bit of concern due to the lack of answers. It seems Harry is under a Fidelius charm or under powerful wards. I cannot track him, the old wizard responded calmly, but internally he was frustrated. DxD. James cursed as he looked at the sky with exasperation. Why can't things get simple? Especially when they truly need it. He wasn't the only one, frustrated by this, as behind him, hidden by the adults, for young people were just as disappointed. Merlin. What are we supposed to do now? Ron inquired to his friends with a hiss as he glared at nothing in particular. I don't know, we will have to look for my dear brother in another way, Jacob inquired back with a scowl as he said the words dear brother with a hint of disgust. Ginny, seeing her boyfriend's anger, kissed him on the lips for a few seconds before using her hand to make him look at her dead in the eyes. Don't you worry, love, one day, we will get our revenge on the imposter, not matter how long it takes, the Weasley girl said with a dark grin on her face, which was soon mirrored by Jacob. Yeah, mate, the coward will suffer once we are done with him. Ronald Weasley inquired to his best friend with a pat on the shoulder. Hermione Granger, however, looked unsure as she glanced at her friends. Ever since she first heard Jacob talking about killing his brother, she became more and more wary of him, but due to the fact he was one of her only friends, she decided to stay behind to make sure he will not turn dark. She knew that Ron and Ginny will not listen to her, but she didn't care. Jacob was the one who saved her from the troll in their first year at Hogwarts. Hermione will stand by his side no matter what, unless he abandoned her, but for now, she will be there for him as a true friend should. Suddenly, all attention turned to Albus when the old wizard started to talk in a grave tone. We have no choice but to keep looking for the future of the wizarding world. We must find Harry. But how are we going to do that? Arthur Weasley asked him with a frown as he tried his best to focus on their mission, which was difficult considering all the Muggle technologies he saw around him. We will do this the old way. We must split to cover as much ground as possible, Albus began to say before being interrupted by James F. Potter. But Albus, if we split, where will we regroup? We don't know the area. It was a good question, as some of the people present stared at one another as they all thought the same. Albus hummed to himself as he stroked his large beard in thought. Professor, if I may? Hermione politely asked the headmaster of Hogwarts as she stepped forward. Dumbledore slowly turned his head toward the young Gryffindor girl before nodding his head, giving her his permission to speak freely. Maybe we should first explore around, and when we are ready, we can choose a specific place as a checkpoint, the bushy-haired young woman explained to the old wizard in a manner similar to Lily when she was serious. That's an excellent idea. Arthur instantly agreed, as it would give them, or more like him, a chance to see the Muggle world a bit more. Well, the Japanese won, but it was better than nothing. Of course you would say that, Molly grumbled with a hint of annoyance as she knew her husband was totally crazy about seeing Muggle things. It was an obsession of his, and while she respected it, that didn't mean she liked it. For her, Muggles could do nothing better than wizards as they had no magic. It was equally the case of most of the wizards present right now except for Hermione Granger, as she was Muggle-born. While herself was born magical, unlike her parents who were normals, she has liked her BRTH world a lot. So imagine her frustration when sometimes she came across people who couldn't stop saying bad things about Muggles and their primitive lives. As far as she knew, Muggles went to the moon while wizards and witches didn't. However, she knew that no one in the wizarding world except the other Muggleborns would believe her, as for the majority, Muggles were inferior beings. After purebloods would never admit that Muggles are better even if they saw the amazing things the inferior beings created. Cornelius Fudge, Lucius Malfoy, Draco Malfoy, Theodore Nott, Pansy Parkinson, Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband and his brother, Dolores Umbridge M, if you prefer to name a few. Oh, and let's not forget the Dark Lord for good measure. I must agree with Arthur. Mrs. Granger, your idea is the only option we have for now, Albus inquired softly to the young woman, who blushed a bit at the praise as she looked away with embarrassment. Someone else could have said it as well, Ron mumbled with a bit of annoyance before grunting when Jacob elbowed his ribs to shut him up. You do not want Mione to hear you, right? The former boy who lived whispered to his best friend, who paled a bit as he quickly shook his head in answer. Come on everyone, let's take a look around, Albus inquired to the group as he and the rest of his SCRT left the area, determined to success this mission and unaware of what was currently going on far away from there. Meanwhile in Kuo. Lily Evans Potter gulped in fright as sweat drops kept running down her face in nervousness. The English redhead knew that Harry disliked her greatly, well more like hated her, and she was fully prepared to him being angry at her for showing up after so many years. However, now that she saw her eldest son for the first time, she was afraid. On his face, you could see all the hatred and fury he was feeling at the moment as he bared his teeth at her in anger. She felt a pang of sadness at the pure and well-justified loath in his eyes. But that wasn't what was scaring her. No, what was scaring her to the core was the darkish aura surrounding Harry's body and the green eyes, so similar to hers, becoming more feral as they glowed with power. Along with that, Lily also noticed her son's canines becoming slightly bigger along with his arms whose muscles bulged a bit. She was so scared that she didn't move when her eldest son took a step forward in a menacing manner, but then froze in terror at the deep voice, almost growl-like, escaping Harry's throat. How dare you show your ugly face here? The words hurt her more as her heart clenched in self-shame. Harry had the right to be angry at her. After all, she abandoned him at the words of Albus, to many names, Dumbledore, who was the leader of the Light, the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards and chief warlock of the Wizengamot. But ever since the fiasco of the Department of Mysteries, the redhead felt nothing but shame and disgust of what she did. Harry was her son and she was supposed to protect and care for him, and she failed because she was stupid enough to listen to some senile old man. However, she refused to show any weakness. She had a mission to fulfill. Lily took a deep breath before looking back at her eldest son was still glaring at her with those glowing emerald green eyes of his. Then she noticed some shades behind him but brushed them aside to look back at her son, who took another step forward with a growl as his aura was becoming more and more powerful. I came here to dash, Lily began to say before Harry interrupted her. If you dare say you are here to apologize, then you can shove it up your arse, the raven-haired young man snarled with fury before adding in the same tone. You have no rights to apologize after what you did. I know bu Lily tried to retort, but once again she was interrupted by her enraged eldest son, who literally roared. Shut your DMN mouth. I don't want to hear anything from you. Tears stared to fall down her cheeks at the amount of anger and hatred her own baby was showing to her, but she shook her head before looking back at him with determination. "What I have to say, Conser RGH." Lily began to say before choking as a hand wrapped around her hand. "Harry, stop." Remus inquired in alarm as the werewolf rushed forward alongside Sirius and Nymphadora. "Don't call me that," Tonks in an attempt to stop the young man to do something really bad. But then a growl stopped the trio dead in their tracks as Harry glared at them. Suddenly, to the wizard's shock, the young man started to shift. He grew taller as black fur started to appear on his skin. His hands turned into clawed ones as a tufted tail appeared down his back, waving. Harry's teeth, who were normal a second ago, looked sharper and his emerald green eyes were now two large green orbs. His hair grew in size and ran down his back to stop inches above the base of his tail as his ears turned pointy like elves. Where there was previously a young human stood a 2-meter-tall dark lion-like humanoid. Remus, Sirius and Tonks were in shock as it was the first time they saw this form of his and were speechless as they stared at him with wide eyes. Lily, too, was stunned by what her eldest son turned into but couldn't voice her thoughts as her neck was still in Harry's grasp which hadn't loosened. Behind the Lion Man, Elmenhild released a barely audible gasp of shock at the sight of Harry's new form as never before she had seen a creature. While it looked similar to a werewolf, this creature was more cat-like and much more dangerous than those mangy drooling mutts. The doll-like vampire had heard rumors about the young lord having different forms and now she get to see one with her own eyes. Internally, she was thanking her leader for choosing her as the Carmilla faction representative. Yes, she was one lucky vampire. "I will deal with you later. Step aside. It doesn't concern you." Harry hissed at the trio before looking back at a struggling Lily who was having difficulties to breathe at this point. "You do not know how long I have wanted to do this," Harry inquired to his former mother with evil pleasure as he squeezed a bit more. Lily gasped in pain as he felt him tightening his hold on her neck and struggled madly in an attempt to escape. "I came to warn you," she managed to say between two breaths. Those words caught Harry's interest as he narrowed his emerald eyes at the struggling form of the woman currently in his grasp. "And why should I believe you, mother?" he asked her in a mocking tone but an emphasis on the word mother, which was filled with venom, anger and disgust. Lily tried to retort but couldn't as she was having trouble breath properly to form words. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Harry inquired in mock concern before snarling in anger. "Now give me one reason to not end your pathetic life right now." So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 16. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lion Heart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.